My name is Jeannie Morris, and my business analytics team has been researching Dick's Sporting Goods. Today, I will be presenting our use case 5. So, our first exercise asked us to research the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So, the first one is no poverty. A couple of the targets would be trying to eradicate extreme poverty, reducing poverty by at least 50%, and equal rights to ownership, basic services, technology, and economic resources. And then we looked at the relationships that this had with the other sustainable development goals, which it was related to good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, and reduced inequalities. The second would be zero hunger. Some of the targets were universal access to safe and nutritious foods, sustainable food production, and to end all forms of malnutrition. And this related to the Sustainable Development Goals of no poverty, good health and well-being, and clean water and sanitation. The third is good health and well-being, which its targets were to reduce mortality, fight communicable disease, prevent substance abuse, increase health financing, and universal health care. And it was related to no poverty, zero hunger, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, and reduced inequalities. The fourth is quality education. Some of the targets were free primary and secondary education, equal access to quality education, eliminate discrimination in education, and higher education scholarships in developing countries. And some of the relationships with sustainable development goals would be no poverty, gender equality, and reduced inequalities. Fifth, we have gender equality. Some of the targets were to end discrimination and violence against women and girls, equal rights to economic resources, and to eliminate forced marriages. And some of the relationships that gender equality had with the other sustainable development goals were no poverty, good health and well-being, quality education, reduced inequalities, and lastly, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Next, we have clean water and sanitation, and some of its targets were safe and affordable drinking water, to provide access to sanitation and hygiene, to expand water and sanitation support in developing countries, and to protect and restore water-related ecosystems. And it had relationships with the no poverty sustainable development goal, good health and well-being, and then responsible consumption and production. Seventh, we have affordable and clean energy, which had the targets of universal access to modern energy, to increase renewable energy, an improvement in energy efficiency, and to expand and upgrade energy services in developing countries. And it was related to the Sustainable Development Goals of end poverty, industry innovation and infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities, and responsible consumption and production. Eighth, we have decent work and economic growth, and some of its targets were sustainable economic growth, diversity, innovate, and upgrade for economic productivity, and to promote policies to support job creation and growing enterprises. And some of its relationships with the Sustainable Development Goals were ending poverty, good health and well-being, gender equality, and sustainable cities and communities. Ninth, we have industry, innovation, and infrastructure, which had the targets of developing sustainable, resilient, and inclusive infrastructures, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization, increasing access to financial services and markets, and then upgrading all industries and infrastructures for sustainability. And it related to the following sustainable development goals of ending poverty, quality education, and sustainable cities and communities. 10th, we have reduced inequalities, which targeted the goals of reducing income inequalities, promoting universal social, economic, and political inclusion, ensuring equal opportunities and ending discrimination, adopting fiscal and social policies that promote equality, and an improvement in the regulation of global financial markets and institutions. and it was related to the Sustainable Development Goals of no poverty, good health and well-being, and gender equality. Next, we have Sustainable Cities and Communities, which had the targets of safe and affordable housing, affordable and sustainable transport systems, inclusive and sustainable urbanization, and protecting the world's cultural and natural heritage. And this was related to various sustainable development goals, which some of them included no poverty, zero hunger, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, industry innovation and infrastructure, and lastly, reduced inequalities. Next, we have responsible consumption and production, and its targets were to implement the 10-year sustainable consumption and production framework, sustainable management and use of natural resources, to halve the global per capita food waste, responsible management of chemicals and waste, and then substantially reducing waste generation, which we really focused on when researching DICS Sporting Goods and how to reduce plastic bag waste. And then some of its relationships with sustainable development goals were good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, climate action, life below water, and then life on land. Next, we have climate action, which targeted the goals of strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related disasters, integrating climate change measures into policies and planning, build knowledge and capacity to meet climate change, implement the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and to promote mechanisms to raise capacity for planning and management. And some of its relationships with the Sustainable Development Goals were good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, responsible consumption and production, life below water, and life on land. Next, we're going to talk about life below water, and its targets were to reduce marine pollution, protect and restore ecosystems, reduce ocean acidification, sustainable fishing, and conserve coastal and marine areas. And its relationships with the Sustainable Development Goals were clean water and sanitation, sustainable cities and communities, and responsible consumption and production. We will then be talking about life on land, which targeted the goals of conserving and restoring terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems, to end deforestation and restore degraded forests, which is why DICS Sporting Goods transitioned from just having the goal of eliminating plastic waste to then trying to use reusable bags rather than just paper, end desertification and restore degraded land, ensure conservation of mountain ecosystems, and protect biodiversity and natural habitats. And the relationships with the other Sustainable Development Goals were good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, sustainable cities and communities, and responsible consumption and production. Then we have peace, justice, and strong institutions, which targeted reducing violence everywhere, protecting children from abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and violence, promoting the rule of law and ensuring equal access to justice, combat organized crime and illicit financial and arms flows, and sustainably reducing corruption and bribery. And its relationships with the other Sustainable Development Goals were no poverty, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, reduced inequalities, and sustainable cities and communities. And then the last Sustainable Development Goal is partnerships for the goals, and its targets were to mobilize resources to improve domestic revenue collection, implement all development assistance commitments, mobilize financial resources for developing countries, assist developing countries in attaining debt to sustainability, and investing in least developed countries. And its relationships included no poverty, zero hunger, quality education, gender equality, decent work and economic growth, and sustainable cities and communities. And then we were asked to identify the Sustainable Development Goals within our analytics storyline. So our first use case was identifying climate-related risks and opportunities, and we determined that the Sustainable Development Goals that fell under this would be affordable and clean energy, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. Our next descriptive use case was to reduce waste as the company grows, and the sustainable development goals that we fell under this would be responsible consumption and production, and then climate action. And then we move on to our predictive analysis, which includes our predictive use cases, which were to conduct climate scenario analysis to assess potential impact based on possible future climate scenarios, which included the goals of affordable and clean energy, responsible consumption and production, and then climate action. And then secondly, the exploration of alternative options for single-use plastic bags, which had the goals of responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, and life on land. And then thirdly, we have our prescriptive use cases, which included incentives to customers for sustainable choices. And the goals that fell under this would be responsible consumption and production and climate action. And then improved climate management processes, which would have the goals of affordable and clean energy, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. Then we have examples within business settings. The first one for the Sustainable Development Goal 7, affordable and clean energy, we chose Kohl's, because in 2018 it achieved the goal of 20% energy reduction 2 years early, and in 2021 there's a 91% increase of stores Energy Star certified, which uses 35% less energy than similar buildings and generates 1/3 less CO2. Our next example used the Sustainable Development Goal 12, responsible consumption and production, and we chose both IKEA and Nike. Nike fell under this because the Move to Zero movement, moving towards zero carbon and zero waste by increasing recycled materials and products, and then IKEA also had this goal because customers can purchase a bag or use their own. The next example would be Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action, and we related it to JetBlue because they have air travel and shipping among the contributors to CO2 emissions, and they're one of the first airlines to step toward carbon neutrality to offset emissions with renewable jet fuel options. Our next example was Kroger, which followed the Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water, as they're eliminating plastic bags, and Seattle-based Quality Food Center First and Grant. Next, we use Nestle to demonstrate the Sustainable Development Goal 15, life on land, because Nestle reworks company sourcing strategies to ensure none of the commodity goods it uses are sourced through deforestation. And here we were asked to display the Sustainable Development Goals featured within our big data strategy document. So as you can see under our use cases for our descriptive analysis, there was the Sustainable Development Goals 7, 12, and 13. And then our second use case, the Sustainable Development Goals 12 and 13, and so on. Here's a closer look at use cases 1 through 3, the descriptive analysis and predictive, prescriptive, and prescriptive, and that concludes this presentation.